Good morning. Today, I get to introduce you to my new friend, Markus Watson. We met in CPA, which has nothing to do with money or accounting. It's Christian Podcast Association. You know, if you know me, I would not be in accounting. Anyway, and I always like Markus. He is a fellow podcaster, as I intimated, but also just a great spiritual leader, a great man of God. And I always like it when he makes comments. And so I asked if he would bless our listeners today on talking about legacy. But first, Markus, if you could just tell us a little bit about your background, your family, and your ministry, and then we'll get into the legacy questions.
Yeah. So background going way back, like childhood and all that?
Yeah,
Or,
like I'd like to
okay.
know, you were going to be an actor. You can talk about
Oh,
that.
yeah, sure. Okay.
Because we're both Californians. Sort of.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I grew up in a Christian family. My dad is a pastor, and I'll come to that. So even though I'm a pastor now, I never in a million years thought I would be a pastor, not because I love my dad, but that was his thing, right? That was his thing. Right. I couldn't see myself doing that. What I wanted to do was when I was little, I wanted to be a movie star. Oh. And then I got a little older in high school. I was like, no, I want to be a movie director. Yeah. And
do they make more money?
No, I think I just wanted more control. And I like the idea of being behind the camera and telling the whole story. Anyway, so that was my dream growing up. I didn't live anywhere near where that could happen. I was born in Los Angeles, but we kept moving away from Los Angeles. We moved to Germany for a few years when I was very young. My mom's German, so we just spent a few years there. Moved back to LA. Then we moved to Western Pennsylvania near Pittsburgh. And then I lived there from 6th grade through college. And then after that came back to LA. And then I did actually work in Hollywood for about 2 years, just kind of doing, working as a production assistant, which is the bottom of the totem pole, right? Okay. That's the, please go bring us coffee or make copies of this or clean that part of the stage up or whatever. But it was fun. I got to work on some, TV specials. That was kind of the niche of the production company that was hiring me. But I also got to work on some music videos. I worked on a Muppets music video, which was super fun. I got to talk to the guy very briefly in the lunch line, the guy who does Gonzo the Great, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I said to him, wow, it was amazing watching them do this, right? It was a music video. So most of us, they're just sort of lip syncing to the music, but then they did this little promo thing in between where Frank Oz, who does Miss Piggy, was there, and Dave Goltz, who does Gonzo, and they had Miss Piggy and Gonzo talking to each other, and they're kind of sitting on the floor with their hands up, and the whole crew is standing around just watching in awe, right? Because it's just so fascinating. And what was fun was in between takes, the puppeteers, Frank Oz and Dave Goltz, didn't talk to each other. Miss Piggy and Gonzo talked to each other. Hey, next time maybe you should blah blah blah. Okay, yeah, I'll try this. And it was just like, wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that was a lot of fun. But Hollywood didn't work out for me because what I realized after a couple of years was that if I was going to succeed in Hollywood, that was going to have to be my number one priority in life. And I couldn't do it. When I was in college, I got involved in Campus Crusade for Christ. And that's where my faith really kind of took off. And ministry and evangelism became really important to me.
Are you saying that there can't be a good Christian actor?
Nope. But it wasn't my calling.
I see.
Yeah. No, in fact, I haven't been involved in it recently, but I got involved as a prayer partner for what's it called? Hollywood Prayer Network, I think, which kind of pairs Christians in Hollywood with other Christians who just pray for them. And so there's this guy who works as an assistant director that I've been marginally in touch with lately. It kind of dissipated, but prayed for this guy for a long time. And so anyway, so there are definitely Christians in Hollywood, but it wasn't my calling.
It wasn't your calling. Okay.
Yeah. So when I gave up that dream, which was truly the hardest thing I had ever done in my life up until that point, because this was a dream that had been with me all my life, and I had never envisioned a future that didn't involve me working in Hollywood in some way.
So this was a big deal
This was a big deal.
when you
Yeah.
left. Okay, it wasn't just a fly by night. Okay, I'm not going to make
Yeah.
it here. Okay.
No. And it was like a 6 months of, I don't know if this is working. Oh, this isn't going the way I thought it would.
Mm,
And I don't like it as much as I thought. I had
right.
sort of this love-hate relationship with it, is like exciting and glamorous in some ways, and then gross and disgusting in other ways. It's just kind of like,
Mhm.
I don't like the personalities. Some of them, one of the things that for me was a little bit of a turning point in my move away from Hollywood was just this recognition that stars are treated like deities, and when you're at the
Mhm.
bottom, you're treated like you're at the bottom. I accidentally, this was before email was widely used. I had to deliver a script to the host of this show that I was working on, and I delivered it to the wrong apartment, kind of put it through a mail slot or something, and it was the wrong one. And I got
Wow.
back to the office, and they're like, "You can't make mistakes like this. This guy is a star." And
Oh.
then the producer is talking to me. He's like, "Well, he's not a star, but he is a celebrity." I'm like, "Oh, interesting. Oh, so he's not here. He's only here, right? So it's not as bad since he's just a celebrity. It would have been worse had he been a star." My mistake, but I'm way down here. So just sort of this weird hierarchy
Mhm.
and ways of valuing people just didn't sit right
Sit
with
right.
me.
Just
Yeah.
just didn't sit right since that's not how God views us.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Right. And so you went into ministry. I mean, it's a
Hmm.
longer story than that,
Yeah.
but skipping ahead here, and you
Hmm.
became a pastor. Is that
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Was
That's
that the
right.
first thing? And did you just love everything about it? What happened?
Good question. Um, Again, yes and no. And I have enjoyed being a pastor. I love ministry. I got into well, my journey to becoming a pastor was one of it's like an accidental journey almost. I mean, it was definitely the journey that God had for me, right? And it was God kind of navigating things, but I was pretty reluctant at first. Again, partly because that was my dad's thing,
Okay.
and I just couldn't see myself as a pastor. I could see myself doing media ministry, right? Or I could see myself, oh, maybe being a youth pastor. That I could do that, right? But being the pastor of a church, that was really hard. And by the time I finally gave in, the reason I gave into that calling, ultimately, like the final turning point, I'd been in the ordination process for a few years, but I was just dragging my feet, and I was at a Good Friday service with my wife, and very contemplative sort of service. And at the end of the service, we prayed a prayer by Saint Augustine, and the first line of that prayer was, "Late have I loved you," and I was
Hmm.
just like, "Oh yeah, I've been very late, Lord, in loving you." And so just I was like, "Lord, I'm sorry. I've been dragging my feet. I know this is where you're calling me." And so I said yes, and I finished that ordination process, and it was the right thing to do, right? It was what God called me to do. And then I served as an associate pastor in Union, Kentucky, near Cincinnati, for about 3 years, and that was great. It was good. It wasn't my comfort zone. I mean, it wasn't. I didn't. I wanted to stay in Southern California, but it was where God called me. So right. So in terms of, did I love everything about being a pastor? That's one of the things I didn't. Was that I had to go somewhere that I didn't really want to go,
Hmm.
but it was the right thing.
Hmm.
And then a few years after being there for a few years, I was called to San Diego to be the pastor of a church here, and senior pastor, well, solo pastor, but the lead pastor, and that was great for most of the time that I was there. I was there for 8.5 years. First 7.5 years were great,
Hmm.
and then the last year was horrible. And so it was, you know, there's good and there's bad. There's good and there's bad. I don't know if you
Well,
want me to go into that story. Yeah.
well, it's a long story, but
Yeah.
I just think it's I think it's important to know that as believers we get attacked, and how do we recover?
Yeah.
Some people leave altogether. I mean, we've had a pastor who was asked to leave,
Hmm.
nothing immoral or whatever, but I don't
Hmm.
think he's ever come back to the pastorate.
Yeah.
Did we do something wrong in how we handled it? We, meaning the whole
Mm-hmm.
church.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you're not only a pastor, I think you have gifts of ministry, like pastoral ministry, you as a
Mm-hmm.
person. And how did it change? Just to say it was a really hard time, we can just say that. But how
Yeah.
did it change you and make you a better at what you're doing now? Because you're sort of a coach, you're a podcaster,
Mm-hmm.
you minister to other
Yeah.
churches. And I think churches are full of hurting people because we're people.
Yeah, that's right. Um, so one of the things that I learned from that experience, and just again, without going into any details, it involved false accusations and involved being investigated. And in the end, I got voted out of my church. And what that experience did was, uh, it gave me more compassion for people who are suffering.
Right.
Um, it's not like I'd never suffered in my life, but that was the worst it had ever been. uh, and and it was the kind of thing where I was like, I can't believe this is happening to me. This is the kind of thing that you read about in magazines or books, and it's
Mm-hmm.
happening to me.
Mm-hmm.
And um yeah, and so it just it gave me a better understanding of people who are going through deep hurt, right? All kinds, whether it's health related, or losing a loved one, or losing a job, or whatever it might be, right? It's like they need somebody. Because one of the things I learned was that I needed people during that time. I needed my wife, my family. I needed friends. One of the great things that happened during that time was, a friend of mine who just really went to bat for me. Another pastor in our presbytery
Mm.
just went to bat for me, and had meetings and sent emails and phone conversations that I couldn't have, right? But he
Right.
had them on my behalf. And so, right, so that gave me an understanding of the need that we have for each other, and for community, and for support and encouragement. The other thing that it did was it kind of clarified for me what does and doesn't really matter.
Ah,
I-
that's pretty
yeah,
important. Can you
yeah,
can you clarify that?
for sure. I wanted to be a really impressive pastor. I wanted people, I wanted to have a church that, even if it was maybe not, whether or not it was a mega church, if it was growing, that would impress people, right?
Right.
And it was not a big church. We had, 120 people when I started, and we had like 80 when I left. Right. So it was this downward trajectory, which is, I mean, it's just kind of what has been happening in churches in general, right? For many, many churches have been declining, especially more like traditional kind of mainline churches. And so I don't think it's because of anything that I did wrong. It's just that was what was happening, but it affected my sense of self-worth.
Right.
Right. I always was wrestling with, what am I doing wrong? How come I, what do I need to do differently? What's wrong with me, right? That I'm not the pastor of a large or growing church. What's wrong with me that I'm the pastor of this small church? Um, and there was this constant need to try to prove my worth,
Hmm.
right? To prove myself. And
When did it
and
hit you that you were really serving the wrong or searching for the wrong thing to have self-worth?
yeah. Well, it happened during that last year at my church, when I was being falsely accused of some stuff. And so I had this moment where I was sitting on the patio of my house, and I was spending a lot of time. I was on sabbatical actually when this started. And so I had a lot of time for reading and prayer and silence and solitude. So I was sitting on the back of my in the back of my house, and had been reading some Psalms of Lament. I understood lament Psalms in a whole new
A lot
way.
better. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh, that's why they're saying destroy my enemies. Because I kind of
Yeah.
feel like that right now. I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Aren't those called imprecatory psalms that
there's some.
prayers or something we pray against our enemies, where you think, oh, if you love one another, you're not supposed to do that, but it's in scripture.
Yeah, it's in scripture. And I think it's not that God wants to destroy our enemies necessarily, but sometimes that's how we feel.
Yeah. Mhm.
And and I think it's okay to express those feelings,
Yeah.
and give them to God, and then
Yeah.
let God be God, right?
Right.
So, but anyway, I'd spent some time in quietness and reading some of these Psalms, and then I just my mind started going into these worst case scenarios of what would happen, if things went really badly. I thought I could lose my job, and I did in the end, right? I could lose my ordination in our denomination. I could lose my reputation, right? And that was really that stung, to think that I could be remembered as guilty of something that I wasn't guilty
Right.
of, right?
Right.
I could lose my family if it looks like I'm guilty of this. I could have gone to prison if these accusations had been true.
Wow.
They weren't, clearly. That's why I'm not in prison. But because anyway, they were investigated. But I had this moment where I thought to myself, I just envisioned myself sitting in a prison cell, having lost everything, and just kind of feeling the darkness of, my gosh, these people who are accusing me, they could take everything away from me, everything. And then I, like, sitting in that darkness, it's like I heard God, obviously not audibly, but I just sort of, it felt like God was saying to me, yes, they might, Marcus, they might take everything from you, but the one thing they can never take from you is my love. And I was like, yeah, nobody can ever take that away from me. And that was the moment when, I had believed in God's unconditional love all my life, really. And I taught it, right? And I totally believed it in my head, but I hadn't really felt it until that moment. And I'm grateful I didn't actually have to lose everything in order to experience God's love, but it became more real to me in that moment than it had ever been before. And it's like it was at that point, in a sense, that everything got put in perspective. I might never be a big church pastor. Who cares? I'm never going to lose God's love for me. Right. And I was reading some great books at that time too, which, by the grace of God, had already been, I'd already put these on my reading list for the summer before any of this even started. But books like Life of the Beloved by Henry Nouwen, Surrender to Love by David Benner, Abba's Child by Brennan Manning, right? So very kind of contemplative sort of reading, and those were exactly what my soul needed at that time, to be reminded that I am God's beloved, and that's the only thing that matters about me. Everything else is secondary, right? And so I don't have to prove myself. I don't have to impress people, right? The only thing that matters is that I'm God's beloved. And one of the things that I loved from Henry Nouwen's book, Life of the Beloved, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says something like this. He says, once you discover yourself to be God's beloved, it's like all you want is for everyone else to know that they're God's beloved too. I was like, yep. And so that's kind of how I see ministry now. I'm not called to make my church get bigger. The church I'm serving right now is in a tiny little rural town, 2,000 people, 800 households. There's already 5 churches in that tiny little town. Yeah, my church isn't going to grow. On a good Sunday, we have 40 people, 45 maybe. On an average Sunday, it's 30, 25. On a bad Sunday, it's 10 or 15 people, and that's totally fine. I'm not. My job is not to try to get this church to grow. My job is to help the people in this church to know that they are God's beloved, and through them to let this community know, the people in that community know that they also are God's beloved. And that's it, right? So
I read a little bit about you, Marcus, and it says here that your passion is to help churches and individuals discover who they really are. Is this what you mean, that they are God's beloved?
Yeah.
That sounded like kind of like a big job. Like, how do you know? If I didn't know like you already, but I might think, well, what is with him that he thinks he knows who I am?
Say more. Wait, explain.
So
Say more about
someone who didn't
that.
know you, someone who didn't know you would
Uh-huh.
say, well, he must think he's pretty swell-headed if he can think that he can help me know who I am,
Ah,
because he doesn't know me. So how do you feel? I mean, I don't feel that way about you,
uh-huh. Sure,
but
sure, sure.
what makes you think you can help someone know who
Oh,
they really are and align themselves with God's passion to save the world?
yeah. Well, I mean, I know you're God's beloved because everybody is,
Okay,
right? I don't have
right.
to, that's not a judgment call. That's just a
Fact.
reality. It's a
Yeah, right,
fact. It's like,
right.
I know you're a human being because you're a human being. I just, it doesn't make me smart to know that.
Okay.
Right. So there's that. But, uh, the other thing is, I mean, God, when we are surrendered to God, and I have learned to be more so over the course of my life, and that experience at my last church, was an exercise in learning to surrender, because I had no control over what was happening,
Right.
or what the outcome would be. I think that as you surrender yourself and you um, let God shape you into the person that you were created to be, um, right, you are better able to serve in the ways that God has called you to serve. And so, for me, uh, I've never even thought about, does this make me arrogant to think that I could help people know that they're God's beloved? I don't think so.
No, but see, I didn't know that was what you meant. I did.
Oh,
I thought it was just like, how are you going to tell me who I am if you don't know me? Someone could read that
yeah,
sentence. But I totally get it when you
yeah,
say that your mission or passion is to let someone know of the truth that they are
yeah,
God's beloved. Because
yeah.
I feel I'm the same way. I do a lot of hospitality and I do a lot of mentoring, and the main
Mhm.
thing is that they know they are loved by God. In
Yeah.
fact, when I taught at a women's retreat years ago, and I was studying Ephesians 3, and Paul was saying that, he was praying for the understanding of God's love, its breadth, its depth, its height, and its whatever. I miss out on one of
Oh
those
yeah,
four
right.
things.
Yeah, I know what you
Anyway,
mean.
and I thought, this is Paul, like the best
Mm.
prayer in the New Testament,
Mhm.
and he's praying for a greater understanding of it. So I
Yeah,
told the women, I said, if he's praying for it, I'm going to
yeah,
pray for it. And I'm going to
yeah,
pray that my kids understand it, because
yeah,
this was a huge, huge prayer that
yeah,
Paul was saying. And
yeah.
he really knew God. I mean, met him on the road to Damascus. I mean, he
Right,
he
right.
he suffered physically for him. And this is what he is praying for. Well, you
Yeah,
better believe it. I'm going to pray that for my kids
yeah,
and for myself.
yeah.
So I think what you're doing is fabulous.
Oh, thank you. Well, and I, it's so easy to forget that that's the most important thing, right?
Mm,
Because I mean, the messages we get from the world constantly are, prove yourself, right? Prove to us how valuable you are. Prove that you deserve our acceptance. Prove to us that that we should pay your salary, pastor,
mhm. Right,
or
right.
anyone in any position, right?
Mhm,
You got to show us. One of the other books that I loved, and I read this during that last year at my last church as well, is Henry Nouwen's Return of the Prodigal Son,
mhm,
which is, gosh, such a great book. I read it when I was in seminary, when I was in my 20s. And at the time I thought, oh, nice book. But
mhm,
then I read it again in the middle of everything I was going through. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I get this now. I
mhm,
understand, right? Because what he
mhm,
says is, um, he talks a lot about the voice of the distant country, right? The voice that called the younger son away to the distant
mm,
country, but which was also the same voice that kept the older son out in the field and
mhm.
kept him from coming in, right? And it's that voice of the distant country that says, prove yourself,
Oh,
right? Yeah. So the younger son took all of his money, and all of his friends said, you are valuable to us as long as you prove your financial well-being to
right.
us, and can pay for all of our partying or whatever, right? And as soon as that was gone, well, you're not worth anything to us anymore,
Mm,
right? That's the voice of the distant country. For the older son, the voice of the distant country says, you got to prove to your father that that you're valuable to him. You got to work, right? You got to do the work. You got to be good. You got to be spiritual. And if you're not spiritual enough, if you're not working hard enough out in the field, in ministry or whatever, then you're not valuable to your father, right? That is also the voice of the distant country. And there's not that much difference between those who are far away from home and those who are close to home but are facing the wrong direction, right? Anyway, that book just gave me so much clarity on again what really matters. I don't need to prove myself to God. I don't even need to prove myself to people. I don't need to prove myself to God. God says you are valuable and worthy, and it's not that God doesn't want to transform us, more and more. I think that,
Of course.
again, as we surrender, we become more fully who we are created to be. I like to think of discipleship as becoming more fully ourselves, right? I am becoming more fully Markus Watson just by surrendering to God and believing that I am of utmost worth to God, whether I succeed in the typical sense or not, right? If everything falls apart, I'm still 100%. I mean, I'm still infinitely valuable to God, and in no way loved less. Doesn't look down on me. Doesn't say, "Come on, Marcus, get your act together." Never
Shape
says
up.
that to me, right?
Yeah,
God doesn't
right.
say that. He said,
I
anyway.
think in this world of social media, I call it the comparison pit. I mean, I can just scroll 2 seconds, maybe 5 seconds on Instagram and suddenly feel badly about myself
Yeah, I
because
know.
I didn't think of that first.
I
And then I
know.
think, well, I'm pretty creative. God's made me a pretty
Uh-huh.
creative person, and I know I have certain gifts by
Yeah,
him, not me,
yeah,
from
yeah,
him. And I thought, I hope I'm not causing other people to feel that way. Not that I'm so great, but there's
right.
always someone, that's what's so bad about comparison is that you can always find someone who's better than you are or who's worse off. So you're either
Yeah,
proud or you're critiquing.
right,
So it's
right.
like, just get your eyes off those other people. Would you
Yeah.
consider this is one of your biggest legacies that you are passing down right now, as far as the life of the beloved, living that out, living loved? Amy Walker calls it living loved, and I just love that expression.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I had to say the legacy I want to leave is I just want people to know that they're God's beloved. People in my church, people who listen to my podcast, my kids and my wife. Um, when like any child or spouse relationship, there are times of tension and times when you're like, oh man, I'm so mad, but then I'm like, okay, but Lord, I just want Robin to know that she's your beloved. I'm my beloved too, but your beloved, right? I want my kids to know that they're your beloved. And how can I live that out as a husband, as a dad, yeah. I just want people to know that they're God's beloved.
And so when you're in conflict with someone that you love, or even a
Mm-hmm.
stranger, how do you go about, uh, I mean, it's kind of a vague question,
Mm-hmm.
but can you give an example of where you thought, okay, this overarching mission is to
Mm-hmm.
let people know they are God's beloved.
Yeah.
How do you do it working it out in a practical way when you're mad at them?
Yeah, right. Well, it's not easy. And I don't do it perfectly, that's for sure. Because, I mean, we're all still human. We have our emotions and we have our triggers from our, earlier years, things that still get us all worked up and stuff. And I
Yeah.
still have that. But I think part of it is just one of the things I love, another great book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, is Pete
That's good.
Scazzaro. Yeah, talks about, and he's citing someone else, I don't remember who, but talks about indifference as a spiritual quality. Indifferent, yeah, that's right, indifference. Not that you don't care, but it's that you leave things up to God, right? And so when I'm in conflict with someone, or someone is pushing back on something, I need to intentionally remind myself, I'm leaving the results up to God, right? Whatever happens here is up to God. And try to stay indifferent in that sense, right? Again, not that I don't care or care about people, but but just stay indifferent to how God leads things. And I will say that, so I'm an Enneagram 9. I don't know if you're familiar with Enneagram, but I'm a
I'm a
peacemaker.
7.
A 7. Oh, okay,
Mhm.
cool. The enthusiast. But I'm a peacemaker, and so I will say that my tendency is to run away from conflict
Ah,
and to withdraw. And so in my case, this is one of the things I learned in my marriage too, is I have to stay engaged, right? If I get angry or frustrated and I go to the other room, right, that's not going to help anything. So for me, part of my surrendering to God is to stay engaged in the conversation, stay engaged in the conflict, holding it lightly, holding the outcome lightly. And again, just thinking about, my family, my wife or my kids, I have to let them be who they are, right? So much conflict comes from us trying to control
right. That's
who
my
the
next
other
sentence
person
was going
is.
to be. Yeah.
Yeah, and trying to get them to do what I want them to do, or to be what I want them to be.
Or to see the way that they are acting is wrong.
Yeah,
So
right.
that's control as a mother, that we just sort of born that way. Say, hey, you really need to shape up, because we do need to parent,
Sure.
but we really aren't in control for very many years at
I
all.
know. I know. Gosh, it goes too fast.
Hey,
But yeah.
Marcus, you reminded
Uh-huh.
me of a interim pastor we had who was
Oh,
terrific. And he
uh-huh.
said one morning in church, and I don't even know what the sermon was on
Hmm.
or the scripture passage, but I'll never forget this line. He says, believers or Christians um, should never be defensive. And I turned to my husband. I said, never be defensive. In other words, I was being
Yeah,
defensive.
right, right,
And
right.
I just thought that would be like an angel. It'd be someone
Mm,
who is so, and this is the same thing as being indifferent. You're not indifferent in a
yeah,
non-caring way. You're
yeah,
indifferent to the pain that they may be inflicting, whether or not they're saying
yeah,
something true.
yeah, yeah,
And to say, okay, let's leave the results with God,
yeah.
instead of shooting back, which I'm pretty verbal and I
Uh,
can, out talk just about anyone, but it's not necessarily a Christ-like way to
yeah,
act,
that's right. Yeah,
So just to hold on to your horses
yeah,
and say, hey, I wonder what the Lord really wants out of
yeah,
this conflict, because
right.
it's not like God loves conflict. I'm in the process of trying to memorize, let's see, whatever it is, where it says, if there be any united, if you're united with Christ, what's that? Any encouragement in being united
Oh,
with
yeah.
Christ. And I thought, oh, this whole
Mm,
year has been one big divisive thing
mm,
in the
yep.
church because of
Yeah,
politics and the
yeah,
virus and everything
yeah,
else. So,
yeah.
well, we need to wrap this up.
Okay.
But is there anything else that you want to leave as far as wisdom and legacy for my audience? I'm sure you've been a great encouragement already.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess I would say it all comes down to, again, just recognizing that no matter what happens, we are God's beloved. And I was thinking one last thought on conflict, that if we can put ourselves into the position of an observer, almost like take ourselves out and say, what's going on here? Uh, where are they coming from? Where am I coming from? Why am I feeling these things? And I wonder how God sees this, right? I think that lends to our being able to love even our enemies, right? Or our adversaries or our opponents in a particular conversation, and to say, oh, I understand. All right, I see where they're coming from. And so, yeah, I can love them, or I can see the things that have led them to see the world this way. Oh, okay, I can love them. I think the
Mhm,
reason God loves everyone is because God understands everyone. And
mhm.
so if we can at least recognize that there are things we don't understand, because we don't understand everyone, right? The
No.
way God does. But if we can recognize that there are things I don't understand about the people I'm interacting with, then I can love them
Mhm.
and really believe that they are God's beloved. Anyway, just a
Well, I think
quick
that's
thought.
part of living by faith.
Yeah.
To love by faith
Yeah.
is to believe the best. That's First Corinthians 13.
Yeah.
I recall a time early in our marriage where I sat down. I had my husband sit down next to me. I go,
Hmm.
now I know you didn't mean to hurt me. And he
Mm.
goes, that's right. Because he wasn't that in touch with what, it
Yeah.
seems like he was always hurting me and he had no clue
Oh.
why. I mean,
Huh.
it wasn't bad, but it was just
Yeah.
like, you are clueless, and it's not like you're
Yeah.
mean, you just don't get it. And so he goes, that's right. What did
Yeah.
I do? And so for me to believe the best in
Mm.
someone, it
Hmm.
helps make them be
Yeah.
the best, and for you to
Yeah.
say we don't know the whole story, it's like that axiom that we say, be kind because you never know what load someone is carrying that day.
Yeah.
I want to add one more thing here. In
Uh-huh.
your description, you talk about story a lot. Is that what you meant, that we don't understand someone's story?
Yeah, for sure. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Everybody's got a story. Right. And I think we forget that. We just see people where they are right now. And
We
I don't
try
know,
to
or
fix them.
we try to fix them, or
Mhm.
we assume things about them based on our own story that may or may not be true.
So
Right.
true.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. This has been a great, kind of a heavy conversation, but
Oh.
I think if people want to hear more about you, they can go to your
Uh-huh.
website. Is it
Uh-huh.
marcuswatson.com? Is that correct?
Yep. That's right.
And you can
Mark.
also hear the whole story
Yep.
of what happened with you and to you. And
Mhm.
also, would you tell us a little bit about your podcast that you're doing for Fuller Seminary?
Yeah, yeah. So my podcast is called Spiritual Life and Leadership, and I've been doing it for about 3 years, maybe 3.5 years by the time your listeners hear this. But working with Fuller for about the last 6 months or so, and the purpose of the podcast is to help spiritual leaders grow in their own union with Jesus so that they can be healthy leaders. So inner life and outer life, healthy inner life of union with Jesus so that they can lead in a healthy way in their outer life. That's kind of what my podcast is about, because that was my journey. I had to
Yeah,
develop a healthy inner life in order to
right.
lead in a healthy way in my outer life. Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. So spiritual life and leadership, you can go to marcuswatson.com. That's Marcus with a K.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, anyway,
Great. All right. Thank you so much. God bless.
thanks.